Hi folks, it's Mikel Weisser, staff reporter for Cannabiz News, and I am all revved up to welcome you to this week's episode of the Keith Stroup Show. It's a weekly update on the politics of marijuana. Ladies and gentlemen, the star of our show launched the entire marijuana movement as the founder of NORML. He's there in the trenches every day fighting in Washington, D.C. for marijuana freedom. You know I'm talking about Keith Stroup. Well, we sure hope that everybody had an appropriate Memorial Day. What did you do for your Memorial Day, Keith?
Actually, the day before, I had a lovely day. My wife and I went down and spent a day with good friends, all dopers, along the Potomac. And it really was a fabulous day, and 40, 50 people, an outdoor cookout, etc. So it was actually quite nice. I felt patriotic. It was the kind of thing American families are supposed to do on Memorial Day.
Very nice. I reached out to one of my veteran friends in the marijuana movement, and other than that, I continued to fight against the drug war. So,
but by the way, I can tell you that, just as an aside, one of the people there at the party I went to, in fact, he was a person who invited me, is someone who was in the business for many years, as we used to say, and paid a price at one point. Took a fall. I think almost everyone in the business did. But he's a lovely man, was always nonviolent in the business, took a lot of risk, but for people like him, you and I, Michael, wouldn't have had any marijuana to smoke, and there wouldn't be any marijuana legalization movement, because it's not just about theory. There's a lot of theory involved. I love the right to privacy, and I believe very strongly that it's only incidentally about marijuana, but I also recognize that if there were no marijuana to smoke, we wouldn't have the constituency we have across America, which is why we're finally winning this fight.
Well put. Wow. Yes, I know that myself this year in October, I will have been smoking cannabis for 40 years, and I've only had a medical marijuana card the last 5. So
I think that qualifies you as a regular smoker.
Yeah, I would say, right. I probably count as one. So it's once again been a busy week on the marijuana scene. We had, vetoes in Vermont and Arizona. DEA head Chuck Rosenberg is again denying that cannabis is medicine. During the same time, there's this landmark epilepsy study that came out. The American Legion is joining the fight for cannabis therapy for PTSD-afflicted vets, and the Sante Sioux, that trial is over and everybody's been acquitted. So there's a lot to talk about. We even got Chuck Grassley getting involved in the act of introducing cannabis legislation. But first, Keith, can you believe it? Vetoes in both Vermont and Arizona.
Well, I can believe it. I'm disappointed, that's for sure. Governor, is it Short in Vermont? Come on, he had every reason in the world to support that bill. It was a very modest bill. It didn't establish a legally regulated market. It eliminated penalties for personal use and personal cultivation, and it set up a commission to study and make recommendations about a legally regulated market. Now, I think the governor recognized, almost certainly the commission would, and it will when this is eventually passed, probably in a year or so, they will come back and recommend regulation because it makes sense. But nonetheless, that was excuse me the expression, it's a chicken shit move by the governor in Vermont for no reason.
Amen. Now, there's been since he vetoed this on Wednesday the 24th, there's been reports of a potential compromise, and this coming up in discussion at a scheduled veto session this summer.
Even as I call him dirty names, I must admit, his opposition was surprisingly soft. If you're going to veto a bill like this, usually you do it traditionally based on the fact that marijuana is reefer madness. How could we possibly legalize this dangerous drug? He didn't actually do that. To his credit, he acknowledged the legitimacy of the legal marijuana argument in ending prohibition, but he indicated he still had concerns in particular about potential adolescent use and DUIDs. Well, frankly, those aren't new issues. In California, when we lost in 2012, I think, from exit polling, those were the two issues that bothered most people who voted against the legalization initiative. So I think it's worthwhile for all of us to understand we must continue to focus on those issues and to offer good factual information to those people who have questions. Now, I don't know for sure if the governor had those questions or whether that was just his Republican cover for vetoing the bill. But as part of his veto message, he didn't even call it a veto. He said, I'm sending it back. Well, there's only one way you send it back, you veto it. But he invited them. He said, I hope we will have a discussion about ways to be more protective in those two areas, and if so, we might deal with it in the veto session. So, I mean, man, that's an invitation, and I know those on our side are certainly working hard to try to take advantage of it. So I don't think it's out of the question. We might still win in Vermont this year, but it is amazing to see how cautious elected officials remain on an issue, and this is, 60% of the American public and a higher percentage in Vermont have already said they want to end prohibition and they want legal regulation. It doesn't take a lot of political courage, but apparently more than the current governor has.
This week's episode of the Keith Stroup Show is sponsored by the Hoban Law Group. The nation's premier cannabusiness law firm, Hoban Law, is also the nation's only full-service cannabis business law group. Formed in 2009, Hoban Law has been Colorado's largest, most experienced cannabis business law firm and consistently provided expert commercial legal advice to its clients in the regulated marijuana dispensary system and the industrial hemp sector. As the burgeoning movement has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, HLG has grown with it. Now home to a national footprint of attorneys licensed in over a dozen states across the country, with the expertise to offer its clients one-stop shop for their rapidly expanding business legal needs. Call the Hoban Law Group at 303-674-7000 or visit them online at Hoban Law. That's HOBAN.law. Well, something that is a consolation, if it isn't solved in the 1 or 2 day session this summer, they'll be allowed to take the bill back up next January during their legislative session, and they won't have to start back at point zero.
Oh, that is good news. Procedurally, they get to pick up as it's a second year of a 2-year session. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, every state legislature is different, and I'm sure most of our listeners understand. But some of them, Virginia, for example, they meet, I think it's 3 or 4 months, once every 2 years. I mean, can you imagine? That's it. If you don't get it done in that 3 or 4 month period, then, well, come back and talk to us in 2 years. Then now, the advantage, I have to admit, they have citizen legislators. These are not people who spend their year making money by being state legislators. They get paid for a few months, but they all have other jobs. Now, I think that also opens up a lot of conflicts of interest, but that's not the purpose of our show tonight.
Right. In Texas, they won't be able to take up new legislation until 2019 as an example of the problems of this 2-year thing.
Now, I think Texas at least does go a little longer in the year they meet, although, as I think about it, are they already out of session? If so, they didn't go very long either.
No. There's, in fact, a new bill that just passed through both the House and the Senate in Texas that wouldn't have been on my marijuana radar, but it's an expungement bill that does include
that's right,
minor possession cases. So they're still doing something. The two big bills that Texas was...
Decrim and expungement, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The decrim and a medical bill.
Modified medical bill, that's right.
Yeah, that went down, but this expungement bill is still in operation. So let me go ahead and acknowledge, out here in Arizona, we had an up-close and personal version of, Wild West version of the Vermont veto with Doug Ducey, our governor, vetoing a hemp bill that had just giant support from both sides of the aisle. It was a real heartbreak.
I mean, can you imagine that someone would, what possible reason would you be opposed to allowing farmers to grow a crop that it is legal to import? Canadian farmers can grow it and sell it to us, and European farmers can grow it and sell it to us. What's the purpose of keeping it illegal? Now, I know for some anti-marijuana zealots, their fear has always been that, well, if we allow industrial hemp to be grown by farmers, marijuana smokers will all go running out and plant rows of high THC marijuana in the middle of that crop, and we won't be able to discover it. Well, if they only understood the science, outdoor industrial hemp is a bane to the growth of legal marijuana.
Is.
It would drive the quality of marijuana down to such a low THC level, you would have no interest in buying or smoking it. So if they
because of cross-pollination.
Yes, of course, there'd be no way. Now, it wouldn't necessarily influence indoor cultivation, which, thank God, much of Grow America is today, because I think it protects us. But, there's still a fairly healthy market for outdoor grown. I have a friend who's an outdoor grower legal in Washington State, and they swear the quality of their outdoor sun-grown marijuana is superior to anything grown indoors. So, I'd like to think that we could have both outdoor and indoor marijuana, but I'd also like to think we could have areas of our state where we grow industrial hemp. I mean, why would we not want to create those jobs?
Yes, here in Arizona, the initial legislation had started with farming area representatives and was backed by the Farm Bureau. I don't have a really good reason. Rationally, I do want to note this. Doug Ducey was the recent keynote speaker
at SAM's conference.
At the SAM's conference.
I saw that.
Those are the anti-marijuana people, folks.
Well, and what they are actually, Michael, it's interesting. They used to be honestly out front anti-marijuana. They were arguing that marijuana kills and, whatever. At some point, they realized they were losing that argument. So they now have dropped back to say, we don't support marijuana prohibition, but we're just against big marijuana. What the hell is that? I mean, we're all against big marijuana if you mean P. Lorillard or coming in and taking over the industry, of course. I'd like to see it more like the craft beer or the wine industry, where every small grower gets a chance to compete and remain in business and grow their own strains. And I think that is the direction the industry is going to go. But our opponents, and they're the best funded, most mainstream opponents we have, called Project SAM. Kevin Sabet is their primary spokesperson, and former Senator Kennedy, who has problems with prescription drugs and alcohol, but he's the co-chair of the group. They claim, oh no, we're not in favor of prohibition, but we're so frightened by big marijuana that we think we should keep arresting smokers. I mean, what a stupid
There
argument.
You go. That's crazy. I think that may actually be the definition of crazy.
and I'm guessing that's where your governor's coming from.
Yeah.
He's got this symbolic or almost gut reaction against marijuana, and so he's going to oppose it in any farm and all farms, and it doesn't matter if it's safe, and even if it makes sense economically for his state, no.
Yeah, it's a hard row ahead. Luckily, things are changing despite the Doug Duceys of the world. In fact, as I hinted at in the opening of the show, we have this new deal where conservative Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley has joined the cannabis crowd and introduced a bill to reschedule CBD as Schedule 2 for research purposes. It also will legalize the possession of non-THC cannabis products throughout the U.S. and, quote, create a pathway for commercial production of FDA-approved marijuana-derived medicines. Now, he's got co-sponsors like Dianne Feinstein, Dick Durbin, Tom Tillis, and Jody Ernst. Now, that doesn't sound to me like your typical bag of stoners looking for some slippery slope to slide off of. What's the deal?
I think what we're seeing here in the medical marijuana field is precisely what many of us feared years ago, which is that we would eventually win this, but unfortunately, there's probably no way to keep the pharmaceutical companies out. And what they're proposing here is that it's okay to legalize the CBD part of marijuana that's often the more important in the medical side, not entirely, by the way. In fact, research shows that it's always more effective when used with a certain amount of THC. But it's interesting, they're not willing to support that if it means that the patient is going to get high. Well, what you and I know, Michael, getting high means you feel good.
Right, you feel better.
Is there something wrong with a sick patient feeling better? When did we get the idea that that would be evil? But at any event, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a combination of the moralists who want to reach out and say, oh, we want to help those sick patients, but of course we don't want them to get high, doing the CBD only. And you notice they're really aiming at so it can be FDA approved. And I can almost guarantee you there may never be another state legislature that will legalize whole smoked marijuana because they don't have to. They now have all the edibles, they have all the oils, they have all the CBD-only versions. And there will probably never be another state that will legalize medical marijuana that is not FDA approved. I hope I'm wrong. But
I hope you're wrong, too.
But I doubt that I am. I think we're in a box canyon, Michael.
Well, good thing that we're working on state or on citizen initiatives as well, pushing things in the other direction. I'm wondering if Senator Grassley's move to join the cannabis crowd has anything to do with the new epilepsy study of GW Pharmaceuticals' Epidiolex.
Well, indeed, I don't doubt that. I have always, when I've spent time on Capitol Hill, Grassley was someone with whom I don't think I ever had but one issue we were in agreement on. He was a big supporter of family farmers. He believed it was important that we keep small farms alive and well in Middle America and Southern America, and I agree with that. And there was a time when I was a lobbyist on that issue here in Washington. But other than that, Grassley has always been someone who supported the other side of whatever the issue was. But I've never seen him or felt when I dealt with him like he was an evil man. Sessions, I think without question, is evil. There are others out there, but I don't think Grassley was. And so I think what Grassley saw at some point were the number of people from his state and others who were moving to Colorado to take care of their young children with Dravet syndrome or some other sick person in their family who could not get relief in Iowa, but who could get relief in Colorado. And he's a decent individual. At some point, he overcame his anti-marijuana bias, at least to the extent that he said, if you don't get high and we can help you out, we're willing to do it. I think it's a big step forward. I'm delighted, but I'm sorry it looks to me like it's all aimed at pharmaceuticals.
I bet that your buddy, NORML Deputy Director Paul Armentano, has a fantastic editorial coming out about this. But let me ask you a couple of questions. One, those of us in the marijuana community hear testimonials all the time. So first question is, why does this study seem to matter more than others? And then two, will this study clear the way for GW Pharmaceuticals to start marketing Epidiolex all across America?
Well, both questions are right on. Number one, there is something new here, and that is that in American medical research, the sort of holy standard, the holy grail, is double-blind studies. They want everything to be double-blind. Well,
peer-reviewed.
Yeah, peer-reviewed and published in a major medical journal. And there have been something like, 14,000 or 24,000 medical studies on marijuana, so it's not like it hasn't been studied to death. But it is true, some of them have been in the laboratory, some have been with mice, some have been with all kinds of things, and not all of them were double-blind studies involving human patients. But we've had 5,000 years experience with marijuana, including the last 200 in this country when it was listed on the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. So we knew for 200 years it was useful to fight epilepsy. But what is new about this is that, number one, it was a totally double-blind study. And by the way, I'm getting all this, my critique from Paul Armentano's publication on it. I don't understand the science nearly as well as he does. And the second is, it was published in the New England Journal of Science and Medicine. What's the name of it now?
New England Journal of Science and Medicine.
Yeah, it's one of the 3 or 4 most respected medical journals in the country. They've certainly never been pro-marijuana. So the fact that they have said what we all knew all along, which is that children with Dravet syndrome, and there's a second syndrome that involves epilepsy that children have as well, that was shown in a previous study to be helped by marijuana, they are overwhelmingly helped. Their numbers of seizures went down from, 14 to 6 a month, or and realize that in some of these people, Dravet syndrome, some of them have 20 and 30 seizures a day. By the way, I'm an epileptic. So
I didn't know that.
Well, I don't generally share that with people. But about when I was 1965, I first had an epileptic seizure, and it was a grand mal seizure. I was fortunate in that I was home in bed, and it was about 5 in the morning, and it scared me to death. And of course, it scared my wife to death because neither of us had ever been familiar with seizures. And we thought it was life-threatening, and she called the ambulance and all that stuff. Well, it turns out that I certainly got my seizures under control. I had, maybe I had 8 or 10 altogether, but over 2 or 3 years. And I haven't had a seizure now in several years because there are some better and better anti-seizure medications. But the truth is, one of the best has always been marijuana. The only reason I haven't been willing myself to switch completely, I've lowered the level of my pharmaceutical anti-seizure, but I didn't want to go totally off of it because seizures in particular benefit from high CBD, and I live in a jurisdiction where it's illegal. So I don't have a regular supply of that. If I lived in Colorado, I assure you, I would be taking high CBD marijuana with THC, and I would totally get off pharmaceuticals.
That's a study that came out this month showed that if medical marijuana patients continue at this rate of substituting medical cannabis for pharmaceuticals, it could be as much as $4.4 billion a year.
Which you can imagine, it might be why the pharmaceutical companies are so opposed to medical marijuana.
Right, that could be. This actually brings up this week's listener question, Keith, since we're talking about impact on dangerous drugs from people switching off of those and getting onto cannabis. This question comes from Nikki Stollard, who is in California. Nikki actually had several questions, but we're going to go with the one about cannabis and the opioid crisis. Now, recently, Sean Spicer tried to make it seem that medical marijuana was causing the opioid crisis. And yet at this very same month, good old Paul Armentano published something that noted cannabis is actually the exit drug from harder drugs, not a gateway to them. So what do we know about the progress of using cannabis to battle opioid addiction?
Well, even although marijuana remains illegal for any use in a dozen states or so, and remains illegal for all but very circumscribed use in half the states, the fact is that the rates of opioid use in states that have legalized medical marijuana is, I think it's roughly 40% reduced. It's
wow.
Astronomical. It's not just a small modification. And again, that's not the result of some political action. It's a result of all of these people who were given more opioids than they needed by doctors who were being permissive, because after all, it was a pharmaceutical and they were probably getting kickbacks. But they find that there are side effects to that opioid use, which are terrible. You can't get off the sofa. There are lots of other terrible side effects. Whereas if medical marijuana is available, or obviously if you're in a state that has full legalization, they find that patients discover they don't need as much opioid use. And so they quit asking for the prescriptions. It's not just that the doctors have become more more cautious, and they have, by the way, because of the national publicity and some prosecutions of doctors who were really running pill mills. But doctors have become more cautious. But that's not why you're seeing the reduction. You're seeing the reduction because tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients have found that I don't need these opioids, and I prefer not to use them if I have marijuana available. I mean, it's an incredible statement. And of course, as you mentioned, I think earlier, it's why some of the traditional veterans groups have finally stepped up and said, look, for PTSD and all these other diseases, conditions, for Christ's sake, let's let these people use medical marijuana.
Well, this is the beginning of a new era, I believe, in America's respect for cannabis. And I know that in states where they have medical marijuana programs, opioid overdoses drop by 26%, which is a significant number. It's not as big as the reduction in prescriptions, but it certainly gives us something to think about.
Oh, it's important. By the way, it wasn't just Spicer. It was Attorney General Sessions used that stupid statement about at some point when someone had suggested that marijuana being available might help people use fewer opioids. He responded with something saying, oh, you mean instead of using a terribly dangerous drug, we use a terribly dangerous drug that's only slightly less dangerous. What an idiot Jeff Sessions is.
Yes, this month your buddy Willie Nelson suggested that Sessions should find out more by trying some himself and then see what he thinks about how the two compare.
Yeah, I thought it was typical Willie. What he knew, of course, is that Jeff Sessions doesn't have a clue either what opioids are about or what marijuana is about. But the idea that he would suggest that marijuana was even somehow similar to heroin, it was like, Jesus, what decade are we in here? But, it's like, don't we all wake up every day and pinch ourselves and say, is Donald Trump and these idiots, are they really running the government?
I tell you, I do. I'm kind of bruised on one arm. So this gives us an idea of what we have ahead of us, listeners, and how the fight needs to continue. So just a reminder, if you're out there, someone listening to this show and wishing that somebody would do something in your hometown, you're the guy you've been waiting for. You're right on track. We hope that you'll find out what you can do to help join the fight. You can learn more by checking out the NORML website. That's NORML.org. Thanks again to Nikki Stollard from somewhere in California for this week's question. Remember, you can send us your questions for Keith, suggestions for the show, by email to questions@KeithStroupShow.com. And we will say something about you on the air. It'll probably be nice things, right, Keith? Probably something nice.
We'll do our best.
We'll do our best, yeah.
I think what I would really say to people is, right now, the sense of resistance is as strong as I remember it since the Vietnam War and the anti-war movement. And so it is time to be part of the resistance, and marijuana legalization is very much part of that. So if you're feeling like you want to be part of the resistance to Donald Trump, and think about joining us and helping us legalize marijuana.
Wow, there are fewer fun ways to resist, I guarantee you, folks, as a NORML member myself. So that's about all the time we have for this week. I want to thank our host, Keith Stroup, for joining us from National NORML headquarters, and encourage you to listen in each week for the latest in marijuana news from Washington, D.C. and around the country. Once again, this has been the Keith Stroup Show. I'm Mikel Weisser, and you're listening to Cannabiz. This week's episode of the Keith Stroup Show is sponsored by the Hoban Law Group. The nation's premier cannabusiness law firm, Hoban Law, is also the nation's only full-service cannabis business law group. Formed in 2009, Hoban Law has been Colorado's largest, most experienced cannabis business law firm and consistently provided expert commercial legal advice to its clients in the regulated marijuana dispensary system and the industrial hemp sector. As the burgeoning movement has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, HLG has grown with it. Now home to a national footprint of attorneys licensed in over a dozen states across the country, with the expertise to offer its clients one-stop shop for their rapidly expanding business legal needs. Call the Hoban Law Group at 303-674-7000 or visit them online at Hoban Law. That's HOBAN.law.